Hello everybody, thank you for being here. My name is Tyler Ellison. I'm going to be delivering to all of you a Ryok transmission, so I hope you enjoy. Sit back and relax. It is our species' highest joy and passion to be able to interact with all of you through this particular channel. In this evening's transmission, we shall describe to you the idea of the different dimensions and how you can more easily conceptualize these different levels of consciousness and relate to them both internally as well as externally, because as you know, you are a microcosm. So the different dimensional levels that exist within you are also present in what you experience as the external reality that appears to be around you. However, understand the inner and outer realities are technically one and the same. Now understand, there are, from our point of view, 10 major dimensions. Now, there are technically infinite dimensions. However, you can group dimensional levels together in a way that relates to the number 10. And through relating to the dimensional levels that exist in such a way, you can then understand more easily how to expand and explore the infinite dimensional levels that exist. So, as you know, you have the idea of everything being one thing. And there is a certain level of that oneness that is not aware of itself at all. Within that level of oneness, there is no separation. Therefore, because there is no separation at all, there is no consciousness, there is no experience. And this level we call dimension 0. Now, there is a level of this oneness that is conscious, that is aware, that it is all things, that it is all that is. And you experience that level of consciousness as God, as source. It is the aspect of the one that is aware that it is all realities, that is aware that it is all beings. And this level of the one that is aware, that we call source or all that is equivalent to what you would call the 10th dimensional perspective, the perspective of source itself. From that 10th dimensional level, you then have the 9th dimension. And this dimension relates primarily to what you would consider to be angelic beings, angelic frequencies of consciousness that, in a sense, take the source energy from the 10th dimension and then utilize it as a framework or a scaffolding or a system of interconnectivity that then merges and links all of the dimensions below. So when you think of angelics, in particular, 9th dimensional angelics, really what you're talking about is an infrastructural frequency of consciousness that disseminates and shares that source energy and information with all of the other dimensions. From the 9th dimension, you then have the idea, a level down, of the 8th dimension. And this relates primarily to the idea of what you might consider to be reality generator forms of consciousness. So, just how you have the idea of the galaxies that exist in your universe, the universe itself, the planets, all of these forms of consciousness represent the idea of macro reality perspectives. And what we mean by this is the eighth dimensional frequencies of consciousness express themselves as reality frameworks that consciousness can then incarnate within. So your Earth has a strong connection to this eighth dimensional perspective. The galaxy has a strong connection to this eighth dimensional perspective. The universe has a strong connection to this eighth dimensional perspective. So think of the eighth dimension primarily as macro reality forms of consciousness. Below this eighth dimensional perspective, you have then the seventh dimension, and this relates primarily to what you would consider to be oversoul frequencies of consciousness. The oversouls represent frequencies of consciousness that then incarnate into the realities that have been generated by these eighth dimensional beings, these eighth dimensional forms of consciousness. Between the idea of the seventh dimension and the fifth dimension, you have, of course, the sixth dimension, and this relates to the idea of what we call the soul dimension. So, souls that are extensions of oversouls, the selves that the oversouls express as, then incarnate across time, across realities, into these landscapes, into these locations, again, that the eighth dimensional beings have given rise to. The fifth dimension relates primarily to what you would consider to be the higher self dimension. The higher self being a bridge of communication that links the incarnate self with the soul. So that way, the incarnate self can experience guidance and illumination as it explores the idea of its reality framework. From here, you then have the idea of the fourth dimension, and this fourth dimensional perspective relates primarily to your Earth experience. The fourth dimension, in many ways, is made up of the three lower dimensions, the first, second, and third dimension, which relate to length, width, and height. And the fourth dimension itself relates to the experience of both space and time. So, in your unique experience incarnating on Earth, you experience yourselves as primarily fourth dimensional beings. Now understand that the oversoul and the souls that branch off from it do not have to necessarily incarnate into the idea of a fourth dimensional reality. The oversoul and the souls that branch off can incarnate into fifth dimensional realities if they wish. They can even incarnate into what you would consider to be sixth dimensional realities. However, those types of incarnations are energetically oriented. They're non-physical in nature. Your fourth dimensional experience in many ways allows for the incarnational theme to be physical in nature. And whenever consciousness incarnates into a fourth dimensional framework, it then also entangles with the first, second, and third dimensional levels, which relate to, again, experiences of length, width, and height, and of course, the experience of space and time, which are properties of that fourth dimensional perspective. Now, even though we have described dimensions 1, 2, and 3 as dimensions that have to do with length, width, and height, that really only describes those dimensions in relationship to how you experience them within the point of view of your fourth dimensional exploration. Understand the first, second, and third dimensions correspond with many different types of realities, many different types of beings. In particular, what you consider to be elemental beings, the Fae, the nature spirits, the gnomes, the undines, so on and so forth. All of these types of consciousness work with dimensions 1, 2, and 3. So when you think of those extra dimensional levels of your Earth that relate to the beings of your legends, your folklore, your myths, you are mainly interacting with beings that are a part of the first, second, and third dimensional frameworks. So even though to you experience dimensions 1, 2, and 3 as experiences of length, width, and height in your physical reality adventuring, they're not limited to just those things. They are entire reality landscapes altogether, and many different forms of consciousness interact with those levels and, in a sense, inhabit those levels. And many of them guide you, because they too are on an evolutionary journey. For whenever you raise your frequency, you increase your perception in a way that allows for you to experience more of what is. It allows for you to experience your point of view as if you were source. Gradually, over time, through gradually increasing your frequency, enabling yourself to become aware of the different levels and dimensions that you're a part of, in a way that ultimately enables you to eventually experience yourselves as all of the beings that occupy those levels, but also as the levels themselves. So, from your fourth dimensional point of view, you have the ability to raise your frequency, which will enable you to experience a greater perspective in relationship to dimensions 1, 2, and 3. When we talk about the idea of grounding, when we talk about the idea of linking into your earth, what you're doing is you're amplifying your point of view in relationship to dimensions 1, 2, and 3, so you can experience more of them, so you can experience the different types of consciousnesses that are a part of those lower levels. And as you holistically integrate with those lower dimensional aspects of yourself, which relate to what you might consider to be the lower self, your physical character, the self you are dreaming yourself to be, you then create a level of alignment within those lower dimensional levels, which then acts as a foundation. It acts as a stabilizing platform, enabling you to then increase your perspective and point of view, so you can then begin to perceive more of your fourth dimensional reality experience, which relates primarily to the idea of your own personal consciousness, which is non-physical in nature. So as you begin to interact with more of that fourth dimensional perspective of yourself, through creating alignment within those lower dimensions, you then begin to increase that fourth dimensional perspective, which allows for you to perceive what you consider to be the astral realms. And these astral realms pertain primarily to the idea of your imagination. It is that fourth dimensional perspective that enables you to exercise an imagination. Thus, through the imagination, creating within your own consciousness a portal that then enables you to experience fifth dimensional perspectives that relate to the higher self. And as you then stabilize and create alignment between the idea of the fourth and fifth dimensional levels of yourself, you are then able to penetrate further with your psychic vision into that sixth dimensional perspective, which relates primarily to the soul level of yourself. The phrase "know thyself" represents a level of stabilization and alignment within that sixth dimensional perspective, that sixth dimensional awareness. And from there, once there is stabilization achieved on that level, you then experience yourself from a more seventh dimensional point of view, which allows for you to connect with what you might consider to be past lives, future lives, recognizing that all of these selves exist at the same time. They are all linked to you by the Oversoul, which of course is 7th dimensional in nature. And as that is stabilized, as you create balance and alignment within your relationship to that level, you then expand your point of view once more to begin to experience alignment gradually on that 8th dimensional level, where you begin to recognize that you are the earth. You are all beings on the earth. And in addition to that, you are also the planets of your solar system. You are the stars that are a part of your galaxy. You are all galaxies. That is what the 8th dimensional alignment allows for you to embody and gradually experience within your own consciousness. And once stabilization has been achieved on that level, you then experience yourself from more of a 9th dimensional perspective, which relates primarily with what you would consider to be more of a multiversal perspective, where not only do you recognize that you are the locations that you experience yourself to be in, not only are you all of the beings that are in those locations, but also you are all alternate versions of those people. You are all alternate versions of those locations. You are also the scaffolding itself that holds all of it together, that disseminates what you call source energies through those environments and landscapes. And then, of course, after this, you have that 10th dimensional perspective, which enables you to experience yourself as all things simultaneously. And of course, when you merge with that perspective, because the 10th dimension includes both source, all that is, and the one, there oftentimes is a process of what you call total dissolution. In other words, when you begin to experience yourself as literally everything, it's almost as if you dissolve into that. And you go through what you call, in your psychological studies, an ego death. You, in a sense, dissolve into that 10th dimensional perspective, that source perspective, and you then are energetically and metaphorically reborn as a new self. Your ascended masters that have reached enlightenment and levels beyond enlightenment have created alignments within their own energy that mirror what we have described to you in this transmission. So understand that what we are describing here is not a feat that is out of reach to anyone on your world. This is something many people on your planet have done and have experienced. And this type of process of creating alignment on those 10 levels is not something that is necessarily done once. For even though we have said that there are 10 major dimensions, that's just a way of neatly categorizing and organizing this information. There are technically infinite dimensions, and you will find that once you make it to that level, the 10th level, and you then go through the idea of that ego death and then rebirth as a new self, you then repeat the process in a higher way, in a new way, that represents creating even more refinement, even more alignment on those 10 levels. However, you're doing it from a higher point of view, from another level of consciousness altogether. This type of experience continues again and again and again and again and again. And when you incarnate physically into a reality, it allows for this process to become much more all-encompassing, to become much more expansive. Because when you incarnate, you are granted access to those lower dimensional levels, the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and even 4th dimension, which enables you to create that stable foundation so you can more expansively align yourselves on those other levels, those non-physical levels. That's one of the reasons why incarnation is so attractive to many forms of consciousness, because it grants the beings that incarnate an opportunity to really hone themselves, develop themselves. So when they then leave the physical reality, so to say, when they then become non-physical once more through creating that energetic shift, there is a level of stability and alignment that is then a part of their consciousness that would otherwise not be there, enabling that process of reality co-creation to be more streamlined, more customizable, more expansive, and more unlimited in nature. So, many of you are actually training yourselves as spirits here on Earth to be master level co-creators through grounding, through creating harmony and alignment within what you call the dimensions of the lower self, within the dimensions of the Earth realms and experiences. And that then allows for greater stability to then be programmed into your spiritual essence. So when you then leave the physical reality, that level of mastery remains then a permanent dimension of your consciousness, thus enabling your spirit to be more expansive, more unlimited, and more capable of creating whatever realities really represent your point of view, because creating your reality does not end when the physical life ends. It continues into the realms of spirit. So, we thank you all for your attention in this particular transmission, and as always, our species, unconditional love and appreciation to each and every single one of you this evening of your time. Alright everybody, thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed.